scientists to try and economists to try to show the need for this, even though when you really dig into the science literature, it's pretty clearly contradicted. And a wide array of scientists now agree that these neonics on seed are very rarely needed. Maybe 5 or 10% might be justified using them instead of 90+%. And so again, to Peter's point, you really cannot separate out on these complex issues the influence of the corporate interests, just like with the tobacco industry before, where other social scientists have written books about doubtless our product and so forth. The pesticide industries and others have learned from the tobacco industry how to frankly hire scientists to seed a certain amount of doubt about the process and these complex issues, and that can delay effective regulatory action for a very long time.
Can I just ask a question on the neonics? Are they like DDT? They're not fat soluble? I mean, I remember with DDT, they were estrogenic, they remained in your body, they didn't flush out through your urine because they were not water soluble. Is that the same thing with these other compounds where they stay in your body and there's a cumulative effect, and that would be true with animals as well? And is there any difference between humans and animals that are, or plants? I mean, is there these things ever flush out?
They're not, neonics are highly water soluble, so they're not bioaccumulative, but they're also just about ubiquitous. So there's, and same with glyphosate, there's just this constant ongoing exposure. They do not bioaccumulate, but on the other hand, the downside of that for the neonics is because they're so highly water soluble, they go right through the soil and into our water supply and can harm aquatic, beneficial aquatic organisms. So even though on the one hand it's good that they're not fat soluble, the water solubility allows them to go through it. And unfortunately, while they're not one of the big problems with DDT and related organochlorine compounds, they were highly persistent. As many of you may remember, the half-life, the time it takes for half of it to go away, could be 10, 20 or more years. One of the things that's been, there's been a move towards less persistence, and these neonics, unfortunately, are reversible. That they're not as persistent as the organochlorines, but their half-life can be 1 or 2 or more years. And so they can accumulate to some extent in the soil or water and so forth, but they're not bioaccumulating our fat.
Other questions?
I had a question about the worker protection rules. Maybe this is for Peter and Jeanine. So Jeanine, you had mentioned at one point that New York is sort of waiting to see what EPA does, but you also said in your presentation that New York could go to a higher standard, right? Like it could push it more. So I guess my question is New York working on pushing to make the old worker rule under the Obama administration codified in New York at least? And then that raises a larger question as to whether workers in states that are less regulated, could they bring some sort of equal protection under law claim saying that they're not being protected the way that they should be?
Well, the worker protection standards are different from the registration. We have a cooperative agreement with EPA to administer the program, and I don't know if we can just go and do whatever we want. So we kind of have to do what they tell us to do in that part. But we have been moving forward with getting ready to do everything. So we were all set to we had our websites going and all that type of things. Just to get the information out, posters and that type. To get the word out.
So the worker protection standards they're now in effect. In terms of the rule is in effect with certain compliance states, and Pruitt has announced an intent to weaken them, but he hasn't yet. But I guess we do think that states, since, for example, in many ways California is already implementing a lot of the more stringent worker protection standards, and other states can certainly do that.
And we have more certification requirements than the federal level.
I was interested in the fact that Roundup is being used as a desiccant for grain. I mean, it seems like you find other desiccants besides Roundup to use for grain. Why is it so special?
It's a great question.
Well,
Because they can?
well, Roundup, I mean, there's a couple things. One, it happens to be a very, what's called broad spectrum herbicide. It's highly effective against lots of different weeds. Many herbicides are more selective. They only work against broadleaf plants or monocots, grasses, and so forth. And tended to work very well against perennial weeds, weeds that can come up year after year without reseeding, older weeds, and so forth. So it's highly effective. It also degrades fairly rapidly in the soil, although not as rapidly as we used to think. And so if you plant something, the next crop, it's not going to be there in the soil to harm the crop, which other herbicides do. So for a number of reasons, and it was off patent by the time it was, these crops were coming into effect, so it was fairly cheap. So, I mean, there are a number of reasons why glyphosate in particular is highly used, but now what's happening is because of these resistant weeds that have really become epidemic. I mean, the National Academy of Sciences had several weed summits to deal with this. And in some parts of the country, it's really a dramatic problem. Now the companies are using old herbicides like dicamba and 2,4-D that were developed in the 40s and 50s and 60s and are highly prone to drift and damaging surrounding crops and surrounding landscape and so forth. And the use of that, states like Arkansas have banned the use of that, even though the US EPA has approved it, because last year it was estimated there were over 3 million acres of soybeans that were damaged just by drift from these old herbicides that the crops are now engineered to resist. This year we think that a lot of farmers are going to plant defensively that didn't plant using Roundup Ready, dicamba Ready soybeans just to avoid the damage of drift. And so it's really an insidious process. And so it's, glyphosate was used for particular reasons because of its particular properties, but now they're going back to older herbicides that have lots of other problems.
Kim, did you have something to add about
why
the
are they using a
being?
desiccant then? I mean, why can't they use something else that doesn't keep the crops dry before harvesting, sending to the market?
Why even use it at all? Right?
Well,
Why
yeah.
not let Mother Nature do its job?
Yeah.
Right. Desiccants.
You probably can use other things. It's also used sometimes as a ripener, like for canola, where you spray it about 6 weeks, 4 or 6 weeks, and that sort of at a very low dosage, but it stresses the plant, so it puts more effort into the seeds, which is what the plant rather than other growing. And so what people are now finding, because that would leave a little bit of residue in the canola oil, they're using other products other than glyphosate, but that was the first one they used as a ripener.
But they're using it at the end of the cycle before they go to the market to keep the crop dry. I mean, why can't they use some other substance and Roundup to do that?
What I'm saying is they can. I don't know about the desiccant use, but the ripener use, which was first, they did use that, and now there's pressure to find other products that aren't pesticide. You can actually put more fertilizer on, and in some weird way it also stresses the plant and has the same impact. So, but because it was cheap, it was widely available, the companies were peddling it, I suppose that's why that was their sort of first choice.
So they were there first. We work in.
Another question, because I know we're coming up to 8:30 in a few
Going back
minutes.
to initial registrations for these pesticides, is there any concern, I don't know about the testing process, so the rodent and vitro studies, are they doing these internally? Are there independent labs? Is there any concern for the public that they're squashing science that would show that it's harmful and only using the studies that maybe, show some doubt? Can you speak about that?
I would strongly urge you to check out, for instance, U.S. Right to Know, who has been tracking very closely the litigation in the multi-district litigation that's in San Francisco Federal, wherein it's a mass tort trying to address non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and there was indeed internal documents showing the influence of Monsanto upon a variety of scientists, basically ghostwriting, of course, a lot of the studies. And so you can see these documents that are in the public record, and you also, frankly, see some very other interesting techniques akin to, what we perhaps see with regards to the whole Russia infiltration of our politics, wherein, they are, frankly, got a very interesting propaganda campaign at work in terms of trying to skew the science.
There's a book called Whitewash by Carrie Gillum, which is all about Roundup.
And she is from U.S. Right to Know.
She's now at U.S. Right to Know.
That's correct, and she is just awesome, and she was just diligent in terms of tracking a lot of these documents, and is indeed a great resource.
Another issue with the testing, and there's a reason for why it's done, but one, the studies that the EPA uses to register are industry-supported and industry-sponsored studies, either in-house or hiring other labs, and so certainly there is some concern about that, and when there have been studies of studies to look at the outcome just in terms of percentages, in terms of the source, and generally it has been shown that industry-supported studies usually are more favorable more often and less critical than independent studies are. It's not completely one-sided, but there is a slant in that direction. Another problem is that the studies that EPA requires are somewhat limited and are vetted for being reproducible, and that makes sense. Good, what's called good laboratory practice and so forth. But there can be lots and lots of studies that are accepted in the peer-reviewed literature as solid, perfectly good scientific studies that EPA either doesn't accept or discounts substantially, including epidemiology, because it hasn't gone through this vetting process, but it's quite acceptable to the science community. And that, I think, restricts, again, a lot of what EPA looks at, favor industry-supported studies over more independent studies that are using good scientific methods.
Well, we're pretty much at 8:30.
There's one last question.
One last question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, one last question, hang in there.
So, actually, I was going to ask about the
Chlorpyrifos?
yeah, before you even started talking about it, because I have this vivid memory of, Trump giving the pen to the CEO of Dow about, he signed the executive order, to roll back, regulations. So my question was, first of all, I had a couple. One was, and you can just think about it, why was there a delay from 2000 to 2008 if that was when the Obama administration was coming in? The second is that I know that Dow was lobbying Trump to set aside federal scientists' findings about how these pesticides affected endangered species and threatened species. So when they said to set aside these findings, does that mean like just not incorporate them in their deciding what to do, or does that mean pretend as if they never existed? And then my third question is, in terms of the state, our New York State House having passed the ban. So, and you had mentioned about bringing the product comes in otherwise. Is there a way for the state to pass a ban on bringing in those products from other states that use those pesticides?
The answer to the last one, the state has, under state law, if the Senate were to pass it and the governor were to sign it, could prevent the use of chlorpyrifos in New York.
Yeah, but not.
But under interstate commerce issues, they can't prevent the importation, or it'd be much harder. They would have to show a lot that would be very difficult to prevent the importation, say, of food that had been on which chlorpyrifos had been used, but had been grown in another state. So that would be much harder. Your question about why there was such delay, it really goes back to what we've been saying. And even though the Obama administration did move forward, we had to sue them in 2007 and get the court order. So the Office of Pesticides at EPA has always been, obviously because they have to work with industry so much just because of the volume of work, they've always been, in our view, a little slow to move forward on these protections, even under a Democratic administration.
And federal findings about setting them aside. by federal scientists' findings that pesticide.
That doesn't ring a bell to me, so I'm not sure, maybe somebody else.
Just on a side, we have issued FOIA requests of the EPA with regards to glyphosate, and it is just fascinating when you get these documents showing these sign-in sheets of basically everyone with, government, email addresses, and then the rest are all Monsanto. And there is indeed a very cozy relationship in terms of the EPA and these large chemical companies.
Because when they said federal scientists, I thought it meant like not industry scientists, federal being separate.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much to the panelists, and thanks for you all for being here.
Thank you all.